Hi everyone, Season 9 has been out for roughly a month now, and I want to make my state of the game and Season 9 feedback video. So I've been playing quite a lot this time around. I have a little feedback document here that I just collected some thoughts for, and I'll give you a rundown of what I have done this season so you understand where I'm coming from, and I will talk about the general game systems, fundamental issues, and then all of the classes individually and my wish list for the upcoming seasons. And as you may know, we did have this expansion preview for content creators lately. Unfortunately, I can't talk about that in any capacity. So there will be some topics I will be leaving out here, or I'll be a little vague about, or just sideline them a little bit. But there are obviously a lot of things that could be improved in Diablo 4, even in a live game right now in Season 10 or maybe Season 11 or any of the other future updates, and I want to go through them here. The good thing is that Blizzard usually listens to feedback quite a lot, and I also regularly see some of my suggestions in the patch notes, for example, or if you have any of your own comments, then leave them down below in the comments, and I can pick those up, maybe add it to my document, and then I will send it over to Blizzard as well, so they have the full rundown of my thoughts. But usually I also share bits and pieces throughout the season with them anyway, and I regularly get to talk to some of the devs, for example, or just write them some notes and these kind of things, and well, maybe the game will just improve. But overall, I have to say I actually had a really good time in Season 9. As you see here, I was blasting quite a lot, so I played 3.5 weeks non-stop, around 250 hours, maybe more. So this is something like 10-12 hours a day or so. I played only hardcore, almost SSF. So I was mostly just selling runes to have a bit of gold, and that's about it, so I can masterwork. But besides that, I didn't really buy stuff or so. And yeah, I played a lot of fun builds. I actually decided this season around only fun allowed. And well, I played a lot of different builds here. So that's 4, 8, 16 different builds that I've played. A little bit less than Season 8. But I had a really good time with basically all of them. And that is definitely props to Blizzard here. They did create a pretty good, diverse, and very fun meta across all of the classes. The only one I left out was a Necromancer, because I was not really excited to try anything there this time around, but I had done them, for example, in Season 8. Before I jump in with all of the details about my feedback, I will go through this in a second. I want to give a shout out to our sponsor of this video. This is the Crimson Market. You might know these guys. I've been partnered with them for a long time. They have been working with their trade site here since Diablo 4's inception. I've been using it in the past as well and showing this off many times. For example, here they have the D4 trading platform. You can sell and list items and buy items here, but they also do these regular big PC giveaways. And this is what I want to show off here. So they have the 2-year anniversary PC coming up, and these are custom builds, and you can enter into this giveaway for free. So this is this machine here, the Crimson Anniversary PC in their Crimson Market colors. Looks very neat, very tidy build. I think this is a very cool one. And you can see the specs here. It's a big machine. And the way this works is that you sign up with the golden ticket. Like this, you can enter for free. Effectively, this gives you a 1-month royal tier subscription for the price of $0.0. And if you don't want to continue staying in this loyalty club, then you can also cancel that immediately without getting charged. So this is kind of a subscription model they have, but with the golden ticket, it's a one-time offer where you can enter for free. And as soon as you have this, you're gonna be automatically entered into the giveaway, which is gonna be pulled on Saturday live on stream. So this is in 5 days after recording of this video, so you can watch that. And then we're gonna pull the winner with a spin the wheel kind of moment, basically. So check this out here. I'll have this linked down in the comments and in the description. They also have this cool little map here with the previous winners and these really cool machines they've built here. For example, the Spiritborn PC with the diamond, that was really cool. The blood reactor, I think this was one was called. Also a Diablo 4 themed thing for launch, I believe. The last E-clock, and yeah, lots of really cool stuff here. So go check out the Crimson Market, enter the giveaway if you want, and otherwise let's go back to the rest of the video. So just a quick rundown of the builds that I have played. So we had the Lunging Strike Barb here, that was really fun. And we had 3 different builds on the Druid pole, obviously really powerful. I also had a really good time with that. Actually, the first time I really enjoyed pushing pits in this game, actually. You know that, for example, in Diablo 3, that's mostly what I was doing. Solo pushing was my jam, basically, in Diablo 3. But in Diablo 4, it has just never really been popping off. It was never really fun the same way as creative pushing was in Diablo 3. And this is also a topic I want to talk about a little bit. But with Pulse, actually, it was pretty cool thanks to this like mobility and the positioning minigame that you have with the new Rotting Lightbringer, for example. Otherwise, Druids are looking also just really fine and really good builds there. Rogue, obviously, my main, I guess. Maybe to get up with the Spiritborn these days. I played a lot of Spiritborn stuff that was also relatively fun, although it does have its issues here as well with the new Balazan builds. I will talk about those. And Sorc Hydra, like undisputed king of the season, I guess. So pretty cracked, and it was also fun to blast with that. So yeah, this is overall what I've been doing here. We also had this 1 week Hardcore SF mini gauntlet. That was really fun. I announced this on Twitter and on a YouTube post and on my Discord. We're running this like community event here where we did like a hard mode version with like very low progression caps. And we had like a point system that was awarded based on how far you got basically. And we had a ton of fun playing with that. So I really hope that we're also going to see something like private leagues as in PoE, for example. I would like to see such a feature, or at very least some sort of SSF mode or a character found mode or something, so we can run these kind of events with like a better moderation and at any time with better control, for example, because a lot of stuff here really relies on trust and goodwill, and it would be really cool to do more stuff like that in the future, and I would like to host events all the time, but it's just such a hassle in Diablo 4. But either way, this is kind of like where I'm coming from here, and let's jump in. So let's jump in here and talk about my experiences in Season 9, starting with the season theme. So we had those Heraldic spellcraft powers, and I gotta say they are feeling kind of like samey as some of the other season themes we've had lately. I guess that comes as no surprise. They're using like almost exactly the same interface. You click together a few of the powers, and yeah, okay, we also had the Heraldic jewels that were mostly copy pasta from Season 7. So overall, in terms of innovation, this is like, a 2, let's say. But it was an okay season theme. I think if this type of season theme had come around like the first or the second time now, it would have probably been very well received as like a standalone season theme without the knowledge of the history of Diablo 4. So basically it's just kind of like a repetition of the stuff we've already had, and it's just kind of, the same old thing for most people. But as a season theme by itself and as a season by itself, I think it was actually relatively good. Overall, I wish that we're gonna get some more exciting season themes. I think this is like a relatively big thing to bring people back, to make people excited. And we're just seeing like kind of rehashed copies of the same stuff since season 2, basically. Every single time we get like this kind of interface where you have like some sort of like powers that you choose that do like some little stuff, some bigger stuff for you, and have like varying degrees of impact for your build. And I think it would be more exciting if we get something crazier and something more impactful, something like itemization based, for example, and maybe also something that actually sticks around and stays in the game and gives us some actual expansion to the existing content and to, for example, the existing crafting systems and so on. So I think this is probably what people are looking for. And season themes are just like very fleeting in Diablo 4, and most of the season content just like never shows up again for I don't know what reason, to be honest. And I would like to see a lot of stuff come back. This is actually part of my wish list that you're gonna see later as well. I think it's kind of a shame that we don't have stuff like Malphas and Bloodseekers and all these kind of things in the game, like the Witch Tide, for example, that could also make its way back with maybe some tweaks, maybe with its own special rewards, something that actually gives you another chase and something to earn. And that is not just a typical like random legendaries all over the place or something like that. I think there's a lot of potential for this, and this is also no exception here. This could also be like a reward distributed somewhere in those systems. Then we had the difficulty scaling. So in Season 9, we had an easier game than in Season 8. Season 8, everything was made harder. Season 9 was kind of relaxed again a little bit, basically. And this ensured that effectively every kind of trash build can end up in Torment 4 and eventually annihilate the Torment 4. Even like the C and D tier builds can do that, basically, if you try hard enough. And the good builds just kind of blast all the way from like level 1 to Torment 4. I think on season start, I've done it in like 11 hours or something or so. I unlocked Torment 4 on SSF Hardcore. So it does go pretty fast. And then obviously very shortly after you will start one-shotting lair bosses in Torment 3, and then you'll start one-shotting them in Torment 4 eventually. And then people do like their endless cycle of Belial farming and whatever. And we've seen a lot of the builds and classes actually push way beyond pit 100. Speed farming like 70s, 80s, even in like 2 minutes or faster. So we have a relatively high power level right now, despite the season theme being kind of on the weaker side for most builds. And if there's like a stronger season theme coming up again, for example, in the future, we're gonna see some pretty crazy player power and a very like shortcut progression. So I think it's gonna be important to make sure that we actually have something to chew on, something to work towards a little bit. And I'm not just saying this as like a complacent high-end blaster that, just kind of destroys the game with anything that I get my hands on. But I think it's important that we actually have something to, just kind of like work towards. And if some builds or some people can't reach the end, I think that's okay. So maybe this should be like looked at again a little bit, or maybe the season themes have to maybe not be so impactful. Or, maybe we're going to see a bit of nerfing for some of the top builds, especially, for example, Pole and Hydra. They were like really cracked, to be honest. Spiritborn is also very powerful, but this is largely based on bugs, which I expect to get removed in Season 10 anyway. And I have some suggestions of that of my own as well, how to do this. But yeah, overall, I gotta say the game felt pretty easy, to be honest. Then next, build diversity. So I already talked about this a little bit in the beginning section. I think we have the most fun meta across all classes that we've ever had. So in terms of like playing different builds and playing fun builds, we have the best choices right now. So everything I've played was just fun. It was at the very least decently powerful and able to do like, pit 90 plus or so to get the glyphs done and these kind of things. So build diversity is actually very good in Season 9, I think. We obviously have some outliers that are like a bit cracked, like the Hydra Sorc. It just goes so fast when it comes to farming the pit, for example, and just in general, it's mostly the teleport problem that Sorcs have. Whenever there is a very strong Sorc build, Sorcs just go the fastest. No one can compete with perma-teleport, basically, in terms of speed, but maybe something like Evade Spiritborn or so kind of gets there. And that's pretty much about it. So the game is just generally very fast-paced at a very high end, and this also kind of crowds out a bunch of the builds that are maybe more exciting to play, or at the very least just can't go as fast. And you will definitely see a bit of like an efficiency gap between high-end Sorcs and high-end everything else most of the time, and this is no exception. But I think this is solvable with like changes to, for example, Sorc Teleport or the Teleport Enchant, or how much cooldown reduction we can acquire and so on. But I guess for now, probably not the biggest deal, because this usually kind of just shines through at a very high end. So once you get like a GG Shaco, triple Masterwork, with cooldown, and a bunch of stuff like that, basically, then we're gonna start seeing the Sorcs really pop off, which is like easily 50, 80 hours or so into the progression. And yeah, just for the very late game, there is simply not that much competition for the Sorcs. But besides that, I think that we had a lot of fun builds, and I would like to see more stuff coming back. There is obviously really big archetypes missing currently. For example, all of the Barb core skills are down bad. Combo points on Rogue are down bad. Spiritborn has a lot of problems with a lot of the double dipping builds and so on. So there's a bunch of issues there. But what we have right now, as long as they kind of like stay somewhere in the range of where they are, and we just get more builds added to that kind of like roughly 8 tier or so power level, I'll be very happy. Then we have the new nightmare dungeons and the escalation system. So this was kind of like a big deal this time around, similar to how they have revamped the boss ladder in Season 8, for example. So I can say I generally like the new nightmare dungeon system, but it does feel like more work could be done, and I'm kind of scared that Blizzard will just kind of like leave it where it is now and not really touch nightmare dungeons again. So I really hope that they're gonna keep iterating on this, because it is definitely getting better, but we need more. So especially when it comes to, like, for example, escalation sigils, I'm kind of unhappy that I can't start an escalation run and then keep the affixes that I rolled on the first sigil and then carry it over to the next and then to the next and so on. I would like those affixes to stay, similar to how it was actually advertised in the original campfire chat for Season 9. where they showed this off and they talked about how there's going to be more affixes added, but the old ones basically should be staying as well. Because like this, we actually have a bit of like better target farming. We can choose, which affixes to run. If I want to farm certain gem fragments, or if I want to farm obols or whatever, I would like to do this a little bit more, targeted and not just like all over the place random sigils. In general, I think that the entire Nightmare Dungeon system could benefit from some sort of sigil crafting or sigil re-rolling or something like that. Something where we can customize the experience a little bit, maybe add affixes of our own, or maybe that's just like a very simple kind of like a reroll option if you don't like what's on the sigil already, or for example during an escalation run at the end where the portal appears, I would like to see maybe like a button where I can reroll the affixes completely random, but it costs me a bit of sigil powder, for example. Something like that I think would already go a long way, just so that we have a bit of player agency and a bit of like targeting the right stuff, because right now it's like we're just at the mercy of the RNG of whatever the sigils get, and that doesn't really feel that great. Then we have the Astaroth fight that comes at the end of the escalation sigils. I think that is a relatively cool fight. It also is nice how it like changes a little bit depending on the affixes. It's like not a trivial boss fight, for example. So especially when you go through the progression, it definitely feels a bit on the stronger side of their bosses, for example. So it's kind of like a similar difficulty there. And I think that is pretty cool. So yeah, overall, I would like to see more customization. Just in general, maybe just something we can do with sigils in order to get the stuff that we want. And then Nightmare Dungeons could have their own role here as like a target farming tool for lots of different things. So I've been doing a lot of Nightmare Dungeons and I generally had a good time here. Besides that though, I think some dungeons could definitely need a bit of like a tweaking in terms of the objectives and the layouts. There are some that are definitely heavily outdated when it comes to backtracking and, annoying objectives and these kind of things. And lastly, the patch cycle. So we did have like 2 major patches basically. So one was a bit of a balance patch that came after like 1.5 weeks or so, and it fixed some of the kind of like bigger issues like this infinite outside farm with season quest and these kind of things. So that was nice to see that Blizzard had like buffed especially some of the weaker builds. Not really enough to like produce a meta shift or something like that, but it was like a nice little bone thrown to some of those builds. So that was really cool to see, and they generally targeted the right stuff here besides like a random pulverized buff out of nowhere. That was a bit weird. But besides that, yeah, I hope that we're gonna see more stuff like that in Season 10 with like a bigger update with, bringing some forgotten builds back or bringing some other builds into the spotlight. And let's see. But besides that, yeah, not really that much happened since the season start. Fundamental issues were not really fixed with like the game or so, but they also don't expect that. We expect that in like the season start patches, and these are just kind of like smaller little updates here and then a bunch of bug fixes. And with that, they have actually done a relatively decent job, I think. Now let's talk about some of the like more generic game problems here. So I have this little list here. I want to talk about tempering and masterworking a little bit. So there are changes coming to those. This is something that Blizzard has been talking about, and well, I do hope they're coming sooner than later, because I think a lot of people are very upset with how the system works. Back when it came out in Loot 2.0, back in Season 4, this was fine. This was like an exciting new system, but over time it has definitely shown the, the problems that we see these days, and people just kind of like get exhausted and burned out from how both of these work. So we need like some sort of tempering revamp that doesn't just break our items all the time, so that we can feel excited when an item drops and not only relieved after we have managed to successfully temper it. So this is like step 1, I think. Tempering needs some sort of addressing that removes the bricking potentially, but I wouldn't mind to see item bricking come back in some other shape. For example, through a corruption type system like Wild Orbs on PoE, for example. So like more towards the end of the journey, it's like when you're really in late game and you have like 10 copies of every unique and every legendary you could ever hope, basically. Then having a chance to gamble on your items to try to improve them or destroy them would be really fun. But at the start of the journey, it's just not really that great, I think. And then we have Masterworking. It kind of has similar issues where people just are not really that excited. Again, when you find, for example, an upgrade, you can't really feel that happy about it immediately. So first you have to go through this here and hope the item survives in the first place. And then you also have to do this. And if you've already like masterworked your item to like the triple crits, which is really hard to do, then you are extremely unlikely to ever try that again on, if you on your like 2 GA item after you've done it on a 1 GA item, for example. And just in general, hitting the right masterworks can be extremely impactful for certain builds. It can be, such a massive damage gap in some cases where there's like specific key stats, like for example, Hydra heads on a like Hydra Sorc with the weapon tempers. If you don't masterwork that up, you easily lose like several pit tiers of damage, even though you masterwork the item to 12. But if it doesn't have the right crits, then it's just kind of worthless. And we have similar examples of like really hard to reach breakpoints and these kind of things. So something needs to happen with masterworking where it's just a bit more consistent. I don't mind the grindiness of it, but there's so much kind of like feels bad man moments about it with the way it works currently, and especially the problem that you first have to reset the entire thing in order to try to have a chance to improve your item. And if you run out of materials on the way there and you don't get something better, then you might even be weaker than you were before, which is kind of the biggest issue here. So I think also masterworking needs like a big revamp here, and I hope to see that we're gonna get some update here like as soon as possible, basically, because I think this is really one of the most unfun systems when it comes to like endgame grinding. Again, I don't mind that we have to invest a lot of time in order to masterwork an item, but the way that the resetting works and the RNG involved with the system is just not really what most people are looking for, I believe. Then we have the overworld. So especially in season 9, I guess we have not really seen much of that. In other seasons, we have seen more overworld content, Witch Tide in season 7 and the incursions in season 8 and so on. So there were specific like seasonal content reasons to go there. This time around, we had a seasonal feature that was mostly based in dungeons and instances. And again, that's going to happen in season 10 with Infernal Hordes, I guess. So I don't really expect anything there. But I think in general, overworld content should become a bigger priority. This is like one of the big things that sets Diablo 4 apart from other games. And there's way too little done in general. I'd like to see like realm walkers return, just like let them walk, randomly, and you encounter them out in the wild, like a goblin basically, and then you slay them. You have this little event, maybe you're gonna call your friends, and then you go into the portal from the realm walker. Stuff like that would be very fun, I believe, and there's a ton more things similar to that as well I would like to see in the future. So they already have existing old content they could bring back, or maybe once a year they bring back like the Witch Tide for a month, and they bring back the Blood Tide for a month, back from season 2 or from season 7, those outdoor like whisper zones, for example, and just have that as a special event for a month, similar to how they run this like a March of the Goblins and the Mother's Blessing events. Just like once a year, in October, the Witch Tide is coming back. It actually fits thematically, like why not do something simple like that, I think. And it would be really cool, and maybe potentially in those months, in those seasons, actually bring back some people into the season when they've already, quit, because maybe it's going to entice them to make another character or something like that. I think there's a lot of like low-hanging fruit here, and in general, I would like to see more stuff going on, whispers improved, new whispers made, and maybe other cool stuff that would excite us to go out in the open world, find some exciting things there, and actually farm that a little bit more in the future as well. Then we have the pit. So the pit still has some fundamental flaws that have not been addressed basically ever since. So pit was introduced in season 4 together with Loot Reborn, and it still has problems like there is not enough progression, and that you don't have to backtrack. There is no third floor or fourth floor or something, so you can maybe skip a bit of stuff and not have to worry around about like finding every single elite when you do a run. You have this random progression bug where sometimes the portal opens like 20% progress too early. You have insane differences between boss fights and the length of those bosses. In general, pit pushing is just not really exciting. So there's a lot of problems here attached to the system, I think. We also have like the glyph leveling that a lot of people don't really seem to enjoy, and it might be worth thinking about some alternatives to glyph leveling, maybe bring them back into Nightmare Dungeons or in other systems, or for example, keep the 5th glyph upgrade that we got from season 9 blessings, maybe permanently, for example. I think that felt pretty good. So there's a lot of stuff like that where I think this is also relatively low-hanging fruit with things that could be addressed to make pit more fun. Personally, I would also like to see, for example, a shorter timer for the pit, because 15-minute pit runs are just not that fun. No matter what build can you play, like it's just kind of too slow paced, too much like face tanking, everything and just kind of like waiting for monsters to die, especially when you go to like higher pit tiers and trying to, push the highest possible. It's just not really that exciting. But on the other hand, it's also less fun than it could be in terms of like speed farming. Partly because of the problems I mentioned with like backtracking and not enough progress. But I think in general, the pit meta is too fast on the speed farming end and too slow on the pushing end. And that needs to kind of like converge a little bit. So what I mean is that most builds are just not very fun when you go very slow. And I think most builds are kind of like the most exciting and the most reasonable when you have a pit meta, or like you farm pits at something like a 3 to 5 minute pace or so, because then you usually fight elites for a few seconds, you set up a combo, or you attack them a few times, and you maybe make a little pull sometimes and so on. But if you do like a 15-minute run, there's like way too much focus on just kind of like tank and spank, especially on the boss fight. Some builds fight bosses for like literally 10 minutes or more, and that's just like super boring. But on the other hand, when you do speed farming, sometimes builds just go way too fast as well. And for example, compared to Diablo 3 Greater Rifts, we have a way faster meta. In Diablo 4, you are almost entirely only rewarded for going fast and not for going a higher tier, for example. Whereas in Diablo 3, there's like a really good balance between going fast and going higher tiers that leads to a slower paced meta. Even though builds can go faster on a low tier, you generally choose to go a bit higher and do something like around 3 minutes runs. That's like the golden rule in Diablo 3. 3-minute runs is what you are aiming for. And I would like to see exactly the same in Diablo 4. But in Diablo 4, the meta is go as fast as you can, do not slow down under any circumstances. And if you go up in tiers and you lose even a few seconds, it's not worth it. This is just kind of like a problem of the difficulty versus reward scaling that Diablo 4 has. There's almost no reward scaling at all, especially when it comes to experience after a certain tier. It doesn't matter if you farm pit 60 or pit 80, as long as you do it in 1 minute, you are fine, basically. Where in Diablo 3, you actually get relatively significant improvements in rewards for going higher, leading to this 3 minutes meta. But in Diablo 4, basically you play something like Hydra Sorc, or you play something like Evade Spiritborn if you really want to farm Paragons, and you clear every single run in 60 seconds, which just kind of makes the fights boring. You one-shot the entire screen, and that's about it. And this kind of completely crowds out a lot of builds, even entire classes like Necromancers. It is nearly impossible to even go that fast, even if you one-shot everything on a Necromancer. Like maybe the fastest you can do is like 90 seconds on a really good run, but otherwise you're probably looking more like a 2 minutes average or so. Even if you have something like Blood Surge that one-shots the entire screen, just because it's Necro and it's not a Sorc, for example. But if the pit meta overall slows down a little bit to where like around 3-minute runs are the preferred efficiency ratio, basically, I think that would be a lot more fun, a lot more exciting, and it would just burn out people a lot less from grinding the pit. I think a lot of people would just enjoy it more. It has worked really well in Diablo 3. And also whenever I, for example, like push my builds a little bit and I go like higher tiers to like boost my glyphs a little bit and these kind of things, or like early in the season when you don't have the full setup, to just kind of like speed blast for everything and so on, I always have the most fun in those moments where a pit run is somewhere in the range of like 3 to 5 minutes. And I think this is really something to shoot for Blizzard as well, to like slow it down a little bit to that point, basically. Not necessarily by nerfing the builds, but by changing the like reward ratio versus difficulty, basically. And lastly, I want to talk about duping. So this has been a problem forever, and the way it's looking, it continues to be a problem forever. But I think this is a pretty high priority fix here. I hear season after season, especially from like my viewers and like my friends and so on that play softcore, like every single time, like day 1, day 2, like, items are already like hyper inflated. The entire economy is ruined from the start. Everyone has infinite Belial mods and so on. And it just kind of like ruins the game experience for a lot of people. Again, also really contributing to like burnout for a lot of players, because they have to farm Belial like non-stop thousands and thousands of times in order to try to get their gear, because the standards are very high, the inflation is very high. You can't really buy anything from anyone if you don't do that, because you have to find those 4G items to sell to RM tiers, to then have 99 billion gold to then buy an item for yourself for the same price. You know, it's all just kind of extremely stupid and kind of ruins the game for a lot of people, I think. Part of the reason why I enjoy hardcore so much, because in hardcore this is usually not the case, so it's like a much kind of cleaner game mode and the economy is kind of like working as intended. But on the other hand, there's also a lot of scarcity in that case, maybe a bit too much scarcity when it comes to the non-duping and non-RMT environment that we have. But I think the game just like makes a lot more sense basically in the hardcore economy compared to the softcore economy. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people that kind of don't really care about this and don't trade at all, and just kind of having a good time, and good for them. But I think it definitely, you know, does put like some weird kind of pressure on people to participate in that economy. They do farm these like infinite Belials, and like they do get like this crazy gear, just kind of burning out on summoning bosses non-stop and actually neglecting the rest of the gameplay loop that you're supposed to have while farming up for those bosses, for example. So overall, it kind of like narrows down the content to very little, very unexciting stuff, basically, for plenty of people. And I think this is certainly something that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. Now let's move on to the classes wish list. So I kind of kept it short and sweet here for all of the classes, but I have some words to say about all of them. So let's start with the Barb here. So obviously we had like a really nice season here with Lunging Strike. It was really fun to play this build, really fast, good farmer. It takes a little bit more effort to get Barb online these days than it used to, because Earthquakes were nerfed, maybe over-nerfed to be honest. I think they've could have unnerfed a few of the things they've taken away. Like the heavy hitter tempers were a huge deal, but on the other hand, I think good riddance because of the masterworking problems with it. But at the very least, they could bring back some of the raw power of Earthquakes, or make them scale in some ways, maybe through like the Paragon node a little bit or so, that it has a bit of a chance to go up again. Or like this strength stacking aspect that exists for it, and I forgot the name now. So Earthquakes, I think, shouldn't just be forgotten, and right now they're probably too weak. The basic stuff is generally okay. So Lunging Strike is the only basic skill that really shines. There's a bit of Flay, and behind that we have Bash, and then way behind that we have Frenzy. And I think especially Frenzy is something that people are probably looking forward to playing, and I know from people that try every single season if they can make a Frenzy build. I think a really good example is like the Diablo 3 Frenzy Barb. I think that was like probably one of the most fun builds out there in Diablo 3 actually. And I really wouldn't mind to see kind of like a copy pasta of that in Diablo 4. I think that was a really cool design there, and it just felt really good to play. So I would like to see something like this. But besides that, obviously, I think everyone knows that who plays Barb. Core skills are down bad. All of the like weapon mastery stuff as well. There is the Mighty Throw build with like the 12-second Barb, and you just nuke everything with like 10 trillion damage. That was a kind of like a weird pushing build. Okay, but it doesn't really have a lot of relevance outside of that. I think it would be cool to see like a return of like Hoda, you know, Upheaval, you know, kind of Bleed is kind of down bad, I think, in general. There's a lot of work to be done here on the core skills on the Barbs, and we need to see something for that. Then I would also like to see a return of like multi-skill Barbs, where like multiple skills actually deal damage. So I always have these fond memories of, you know, back in pre-season when I played the Kratos Barb. I think a lot of guys might remember this, that you know, really just enjoyed this like shoutless, you know, 5 different attack skills on the bar kind of Barb experience, you know, like the Barb as advertised, basically, you know, the arsenal of like all of the different weapons, and you swing your hammer, you swing your axe, you do wield, and all of your skills actually do something. I want to see a return of that, and you know, just press like all of the buttons and have a tool for every situation, basically. So that was just the most fun I've ever had on Barb, and I would like to see that come back. And then in general, the class mechanic of Barb is just like extremely lackluster, I think. In fact, I would actually prefer if like the entire Barb class mechanic basically just becomes like weapon implicits. You know, like swords have this kind of proc, and daggers have that kind of proc, and staffs have this. Right now, all of the weapon types and their implicits are relatively bland and boring choices. And I think it would be way more interesting if they actually had like some real impact. I think they've tried a little bit with like the Spiritborn weapons, for example, with the quarter stuff having some actual like impactful implicit, versus all other weapons in the game, basically. That is just a kind of like a tiny, like, you know, 3% or 5% damage one way or another. And it doesn't really give you any kind of choice besides their attack speed ratios, for example. So I would like to see more exciting stuff kind of baked into weapons in general for everyone, and then give Barbs some actual cool class mechanic. You know, maybe something on the level of rogues with those 3 different choices they have, or something like that would be cool, I think. Because right now, Barb forever has been basically click on 200x and that's it. And this is also kind of like trivial and boring. And then we have the Druids. So let's move on to that. So Pulf, we had this splashy bug where sometimes the puddles from the Rotting Lightbringer just don't work, which is very annoying because the build is actually extremely fun. It's obviously very powerful. It's like one of the best builds in the game right now. But this splashing bug is just problematic because sometimes you just randomly lose like 80% of your damage. And it seems to have to do with like what kind of terrain you're fighting on. So certain boss arenas just doesn't work, or there's like one little spot in the entire arena you have to find where it does work. So it's obviously kind of stupid, and that is like a very high priority fix here. But on the other hand, when that is being fixed, then we probably also need to bring down the Lightbringer a little bit in terms of power, because it's just kind of like too cracked. Like Pull is just kind of like cheat mode. It is like giga tanky, literally unkillable if you want to. I tried. And I couldn't get it done even with the Belial Breath. So yeah, it's just kind of like a crazy build, and especially with Season 10 with a very likely bug fix, I think like bringing it down a little bit would help here. But yeah, overall, Druid is just like really powerful. It's probably like the most powerful class overall, I guess, when it comes to like at least non-bugged builds. So we obviously have the Spiritborn with like a bunch of the Jack Hall stuff going on that has a bunch of builds being extremely strong because of that, but this is going to disappear in the very near future, I imagine. And that kind of leaves Druid as like kind of the overall strongest class, I think, with like the highest variety of like S and A tier builds. I think right now they have like 3 S tier builds or so, and everything else is an A tier pretty much. So Druids are looking very good, but yeah, like maybe a tiny bit too good on the pull. What I'd like to see is Trample, maybe a Trample Slide build coming back as well, but also like Trample as a mobility skill, as a mobility tool would be fun. Right now it's just kind of like not great at doing that job. The knockback is a problem, and it's just kind of like a slow animation. In fact, in some cases you don't even go faster when you trample. If you just, you know, evade or run at 200% movement speed, you're kind of at the same pace, and it's not even an upgrade. So I think that this could be like changed a little bit here to actually be like more of a mobility option for like the bear enjoyers, where Shred is for the wolf enjoyers, for example. Maybe even some option for a human form in general. Bringing human form a bit more into the spotlight would be interesting. Agile Wolf apparently is still bugged again, so that is obviously kind of like a joke. And Grizzly Rage, it has been kind of in the spotlight this season. It also had this bug where we could use it while it's active, which I guess is going to get fixed. But on the other hand, I think this would be a great opportunity to maybe rework Grizzly Rage a little bit, because it has like too much of like a feast and famine mechanic. And whenever Grizzly Rage falls off, you most likely die instantly. And even if you don't die, you can't deal damage to anything for like a minute or something like that. Because no one would really like, you know, stack cooldown and these kind of things in order to try to go into Grizzly Rage more often. Like it's either you press the button and you stay in it forever, or you don't play Grizzly Rage, or you Alt F4 whenever it drops, basically. So this is like how that works, and I think it would be better if that was maybe redesigned as a little bit of like an incarnate skill from the Spiritborn, where you have like a passive component and an active component where you press it and then, you know, beast mode activated, and you just suddenly go crazy for like a few seconds or something like that. It's like some burst cooldown, and otherwise you kind of like passively in Grizzly Rage or something like that. I think that would probably make a lot more sense, remove a lot of frustration, and actually give you an active button to press. That could be very fun. Then we have the Necros. So I haven't played a Necro right now, but just like a few points here of maybe why, and also from what I heard from other people. So we have like this kind of like Shadow Blight plague going on right now, where, you know, basically every build is trying to deal as many Shadow instances as possible in order to trigger Shadow Blight, and that is actually carrying basically half of the Necro class right now or something like that. So it's just like all based on exactly the same stuff, similar to how we have a lot of these Balazan builds on the Spiritborn and so on. So I think that probably went a bit too far with making Shadow Blight good. And it also kind of killed a bunch of the identity of some other builds. So I think it's good if there was like 1 or 2 setups that really shine with this, and, you know, the rest actually have their own thing going on, and it's not just like the same thing all over the place. Besides that, less clunkiness. So I think I keep saying this every single season. For example, we kind of don't have any things to put on our bar, so there's like corpse tendrils that we kind of include in every single build. It's also like the blood orb generation, and most builds don't really have a lot of boards on the Paragon to not go for the blood orb board, for example, or to not go for the corpses board and so on. So I would like to have a bit more alternatives here, maybe an extra Paragon board, or maybe some rework of existing Paragon nodes. Maybe some other utility choices, maybe with an aspect that changes a certain skill. I think a good example is an Inexorable Reaper, where you can use Sever as a mobility skill. I would like to see similar stuff, maybe for some of the core skills or some of the corpse skills or something like that, where we transform them into another utility tool that is maybe better for speed farming, more suited for like a faster scenario, because I think this is really what Necro needs. It's a relatively strong class most of the time. Plus minus depending on the season and where the builds land exactly. But most of the time there's a lot of power in the Necro, but I feel like it's just like very hard to compete with other classes, especially in speed farming. And it's just also like you have to jump through a lot of hoops most of the time in order to, activate this, and that buff, and then actually start dealing damage after you've done like a combo of 7 things. So I would like to maybe see that a little bit relaxed, at least for kind of like weaker, lower end, speedier setups in general. Then we have the rogues. So one thing is pretty obvious, combo points are basically completely dead, and I don't really see a reason why it should remain that way. I think it would be nice to see at least some builds kind of shine with combo points again a little bit, or at least have an alternative playstyle that runs combo points. I think that was generally kind of like a cool concept, especially if, for example, like a bit of a slower paced meta comes around with what I described earlier in my pit feedback. If runs actually go from like 60 to 90 seconds meta to something like a 3 minutes meta, something like combo points also makes a lot of sense again, for example. In the same vein, something like a Kamehameha pen shot. It's just a random idea that I like threw out there like a little while ago to the devs. I'd like to see some sort of like, snipe or like charge up mechanic. So you might know snipe from PoE, for example, where like you hold the skill and you channel it, and then it becomes stronger and stronger until you release it. So something like that would be kind of cool, I think, for pen shot. That would give it like this kind of like insane, burst feeling, like you one-shot the entire screen after you've done like your 1, 2, 3 combo points, and then, charge up, hold it for a second, and then go kaboom. And I want to bring back that kind of like old school feeling of what I enjoyed in Season 3, for example, where a shadow pen shot was kind of like the thing, and I was one-shotting entire screens in the vaults with my shadow imbued and like trick shot pen shots that just kind of went all over the place, and it was just super fun. So I would like to see something like that come back, because I feel like Rogue has a lot of different distinct and fun playstyles right now, but the combo points are completely missing. This kind of like big burst of one-shotting everything kind of feeling is missing, and I'd like to see something like that come back. Then we also have the Azure issue. Generally, I think it's okay for Azure builds to exist and for these proc builds to be a thing, but they're kind of just like all over the place. And like the entire rogue class almost relies on that, or like half the builds at least have an Azure variant that is most likely better than the real core skill variant. I think it's fine if there was like, maybe 1 or 2 builds where Azure is like, the thing to use once you have the right item for it and so on. I wouldn't really like necessarily nerf Azure very much, but at the very least it would be nice to see alternatives that are not just Azure based, but on like a similar power level, where you can actually scale your core skill, and it's like a bit more intuitive for people as well, where you actually play like kind of like a build as it was intended, kind of, instead of just trying to maximize your lucky hits and then proc Azure as much as possible. And lastly, Second Wind and Unstable Elixirs, I think both are problematic passives. Second Wind is the barrier generation passive, so basically every single rogue build just has like double the life, and you also generate that barrier like once or twice or 3 times per second depending on the build, and it's just kind of like insane survivability, and it's just kind of like insane survivability, and probably too much, to be honest, since rogues also already have like a lot of other like really strong defensive tools. They have pretty good Paragon nodes, they have Dark Shroud, they have the Rugged passive, and so on. So rogues are overall like pretty tanky boys basically, and this is partly due to Second Wind. And it also kind of like, is another reason why, for example, combo points are like basically unplayable, or why stuff like Inner Sight also is just kind of like really down bad. Everything is basically preparation these days. and this is part of the reason why. So I think that kind of just goes too far. Yeah, it does too much. It's too good and probably needs to change. And well, Unstable Elixirs is maybe not that crazy impactful unless you play with like Halves and Aimless, for example. But it does have this really weird play style where you just have to press your potion randomly all the time, and it's kind of annoying to do this, I think. I think this is something that should just be removed. I'm not sure why we even got this. I'm not sure who asked for this. I didn't. And I don't think this should be this should just be deleted, honestly. Even if it makes the class a bit weaker, or maybe it could be redesigned to something else that brings back some of the power that it already had, but in a more pleasant way. Then we have the Sorcs here. So I mostly played the Hydra Sorc, and I do have to say Hydra is just like too crazy. I guess realistically, it would probably make sense to just kind of like nerf the Serpentine aspect a little bit or something like that in order to just bring it down in line a little bit, because it just kind of goes too wild. But I also did talk about like the teleport enchant. On the one hand, teleport enchantment is just really fun. You can fly through the maps and so on. But on the other hand, it kind of creates this insane gap and makes the game just so fast paced, especially on the high end of Sorcs specifically, that it's probably a little bit too much. So I think both things could be addressed a little bit. Besides that, Charge Bolt is like a build that has just never existed. I remember trying it in Season 2 or something, and I managed to clear an AOZ tier 10. Wow. And that was about it. And it did get some updates for its unique, and there's also an aspect these days and so on. But it has just never really shined at all. And yeah, it kind of needs something, I guess. Something way better than it has right now, some actual single target damage, and then we'll see. But besides that, I think build diversity is looking kind of okay on the Sorcs. So we do have, you know, some fire builds, some lightning builds that shine. I think the cold builds probably need a bit of love. There's also like some bugs with some of the key passives I know that just don't really work properly in some situations. So that could probably be checked out. Maybe Shatter could become like a thing that actually brings back cold builds also, because Shatter is also like this too much, kind of like it works really well in some situations, and it doesn't really work at all in others, especially boss fights, which is like a pretty big focus these days. So we have some issues there. And yeah, overall, I think that Hydra just kind of outclasses the other builds on the Sorc a bit too much here. So we could see some buffs and maybe some tweaks to Hydra itself. And lastly, the basic skills. So there is Firebolt on the Sorc. That has been a thing for a long time, but that didn't really get much from this whole like basic skills season, and you know, didn't really see a lot of play, I think. Partly again because Hydra is too good, but also we have stuff like the Vox Omnium stuff, which is a pretty cool concept, but completely worthless, really weak. And I think there could be much more done with that, for example, like an update to that unique, and maybe some other tweaks on the class that makes basic skills actually a thing would be interesting. And maybe you could see some new builds pop up here. And lastly, the Spiritborn. So I guess the biggest issue is obvious. It's the Jaguar Hall plus Fel Soothsayer combo that we see right now being used for the Balazan builds. So the TLDR is there's lots of double and triple, maybe even quadruple dipping of multipliers going on. So you deal higher damage, and then the Jaguar Hall procs higher damage, and then the Fel Soothsayer procs higher damage. And that kind of just randomly one-shots a Pit 135 boss. So you might have seen some of those clears, but overall it's like a massive bug fiesta, lots of spaghetti code, and that just needs to go away completely. So I would like to see just both getting completely nuked and replaced with something better, or maybe nothing at all, and we'll probably be better off, to be honest. Because I've actually done that as well. I've been doing quite a bunch of pushing on the Spiritborn, both on the PTR, talking about this bug stuff as well, and then later on the live server, and it's just not enjoyable. It is completely unintuitive. It is you know, basically only working on like very high-end builds, and a lot of people actually have issues playing those Balazan builds at all, because they're also just kind of like squishy, hard to do, very timing related and so on. So there's lots of difficulty factors basically, on top of a crazy amount of RNG where you just rely on some really wacky mechanics to then randomly one-shot a boss, or not if you get unlucky. So that just needs to go entirely basically. So I'd like to see something that does not involve these like echo mechanics, basically. That just always goes wrong in Diablo 4. That should not happen. We've seen this with Shatter. We've seen this with Jack Hall back in Season 6. We've seen this with Fel Soothsayer in Season 6. Now the stuff is back, or it just wasn't really fixed, basically. And it has kind of like started shining again in the spotlight. but it just needs to go. Yeah, then we need defenses. So Spiritborn is certainly by far the worst class on hardcore. The main reason for that is a lot of the defenses are based on blocking or dodging, and both of these things just don't work in many scenarios. Like ground effects, you can't block those. Some things just straight go through them, like the explosive elites and so on. So there needs to be a bit more defenses that you can invest into that actually helps you in all situations. There are a few builds that are relatively tanky or very easy to make tanky. I guess one of them is evade, because you're already like moving all the time, you have very high dodge, and you can very easily stack a lot of life. But most builds don't really have that luxury, and they just run around with like maximum 10k life, even if you try. And then you have this other issue where stuff just goes straight through your defenses. I also noticed this firsthand again this season, where I actually died on my Spiritborn, but just like dipping my little toe into a puddle on Deer fight, for example. And I instantly evaporated. Even though I had so much like block damage reduction and like I couldn't really be hurt, and I had 20k life. And, I just exploded basically. So stuff like that should not happen, especially if you try to make a tanky setup, even if you try to include like defensive aspects that are generally useful. But yeah, that's something should be done, I think, to make Spiritborn a little bit more consistent. Then Razor Wings. Razor Wings was a very fun build, and it's actually a real build now. You can do like 2-minute pit 75s of that and probably push to like 100 or something. So it actually works. It's pretty decent. But it is a bit clunky because it relies on these cooldown resets with intricacy, and I would like to see, for example, all charges come back for Razor Wings so that it's more reliable and you can actually invest into more charges, because right now you don't get all the charges back, and that makes it so that sometimes you just kind of run out of things to press and you can't actually attack for a little while, which makes it a bit awkward in some situations unless you're constantly paying a lot of attention. So I'd like to see that a little bit relaxed. And then just like as an idea, big Devourer buffs, maybe as a support tool, they tried a little bit to make ultimates worthwhile that are not just a hunter, and that worked with at least a seeker. We'll see how this will be like in season 10 or so when this stuff is gone basically. Then you might see some of the other ults also shine a little bit more, but I think the Devourer is just kind of like undertuned still. And I'd also like to see just something cool with the Devourer. I think the Centipede stuff is like the coolest design and the coolest stuff that the Spiritborn has, and too little is done with this. I'd like to see a build maybe similar to like D3 Archon Wizard, where you actually like, take over the Devourer spirit, and then you control it, and it's kind of like a transformation thing. And then you have like a new skill bar and you shoot lasers and stuff like that. Like, I think that would be amazing, and that could be really fun. Or also like maybe as an alternative, like a summoner kind of play style as well. It could be interesting with like, maybe multiple of those spirits, or, maybe you control the Devourer or something like that. I think that'd be fun. Then we have a general single target problem on the entire class. Again, this is something that really shines through this season with the Balazan builds. But in general, every build just kind of feels bad on single target besides Curl Volley. And yeah, especially poison builds, especially Noxious Resonance builds have that issue where I believe there might actually be something wrong with the calculation of Noxious Resonance, for example, and that should be checked out. But on the other hand, even if that is the right calculation, like it's just like there's too much of a gap between boss fights and AoE, and this applies even to non-poison builds, even something like Crushing Hand, Rake. They all have the kind of the same issue. They're kind of like okay clearing packs, and then you have like negative boss damage. So something needs to be done across the board here. And a similar problem to like the Sorcs here, there's the basic skill season that we just had. It just didn't really do anything for Spiritborn. Like Thrash was kind of a build that got a bit of a buff, but it's still on the weak side. Saberzontic, for example, is just undertuned. Rocksplitter got literally nothing because there was a Thorns build, and Withering Fist and Thunderspike, for example, don't really exist as a build as well. So yeah, something could maybe be done to like make this cool. There's also like this aspect like for the combination strikes, for example, that reminds a bit of like the free monk, where you want to use different basic attacks to then get a boost or so, but that aspect is just super undertuned, so you never really want to do that. It would be cool to kind of bring that a bit to the spotlight, for example, have like some kind of like multi-skill build, because you can actually scale all of them kind of together. which is nice. And it would be cool to have like maybe some, you know, you do this skill for that situation and you do this skill for the other situation, and then you kind of like weave in a bunch of the others to get like some other benefit or so. So stuff like that could be pretty fun, I believe, and to break up a bit of the existing build meta on the Spiritborn, because we have not really added a lot of builds since the expansion dropped almost a year ago at this point. And lastly, for the last part of this video here, the other wish list. So I've already talked about this a little bit. I'm done with the classes now, but yeah, we do have some things that I would really like to see. So Malphas and Vaults should come back. Like Malphas could just be another lair boss, for example. Maybe Vaults are like some special, really rare Nightmare Dungeon sigils that you can find, and they are like extremely rewarding for a certain thing. So you could still have this mechanic where you want to try to avoid the traps, for example, and the better you do that, the more rewards you get. But if you do this like just a little bit, you know, like maybe a 1% chance or like a 2% chance or so for a sigil to become a vault sigil or something like that. So not something that we farm non-stop. I think that could be kind of okay. And then like a really like maybe big gold reward at the end, or, you know, something special there could be fun. More seasonal content coming back. I talked about this. Witchtide during Halloween, Bloodseekers maybe coming back in the dungeons and hunting you like the Butcher. Millennium Tunnels that maybe drop something special. Maybe there's like a new Torment 4 only type system where you can farm the Millennium guys and, you know, get legendary jewels similar to these heraldic jewels that we have right now, but as like a permanent system, for example. So tons of stuff you could do here. I would like to see unique loot tables for every boss as well. So right now we have like 3 bosses that have exactly the same loot table, and it just kind of dilutes the loot table too much. And it's very hard to like really target farm certain items. I'd like to see more target farming, not less. We've already got like a dilution of the loot tables with half of the loot dropping from all over the place when you farm a boss. So that is just also kind of a bit annoying. And I would like to see a better distribution of all these items across all of the bosses. So that is really like a certain boss that you want to go for to get that item, basically. And similar, I would like to see the same thing for runes and mythics, where maybe not necessarily a certain boss only drops that one mythic, but maybe they can drop all of them, but it has like a higher chance to drop this specific one. Like the Andariel's Visage just has like a 5 times higher chance when you fight Andariel. And then Shadow Vow has a 5 times higher chance when you fight Urivar, and so on. And the same thing for the runes. I would like to see a bit of like a target farming, maybe better target crafting of runes as well. Because the current system is just kind of like, yeah, we get spammed with runes, but we only really care about certain ones, and we can't really get them besides just like a full RNG system. And I think that's just annoying and kind of unnecessary. Tempering, I talked about this Masterwork as well, so both these systems hopefully change sooner rather than later. But yeah, the breaking items at the start is a problem, and also, you know, like the undesirable like upgrades, basically, like we find a better item of what we have already, but we really don't want to go through the whole process again. It's kind of an issue, I think. And also just like, you know, certain breakpoints, certain like, you know, crits on certain stats are just so ridiculously good that you have to get them, basically. And it's just like an unfun system. And then maybe in general, like I talked about, like how the pit meta is too fast and we do too fast runs. I think in general, cooldown reduction values are a bit of a big culprit here. We just kind of get to the point where we perma TP, we have perma every ultimate, we have perma everything all the time. It's like, you know, like the entire game has become kind of like a face roll fest across all classes and all builds almost. There's not many builds where you really have like a certain like situational button anymore that you only press when, you know, shit really hits the fan, basically. I would like to see something like that come back a little bit more. I would like to see lower cooldown values and lower attack speed values as well, because I think everything just has become too crazy, too like hyper speed, basically. And I would like to see a little bit more of a return to the roots, so to say. And lastly, more endgame crafting. So I mentioned this a little bit here with, you know, maybe something like Millennium Tunnels or maybe other seasonal content that could come back here. But in general, I'd like to see, you know, more control over our loot. Maybe something like a recombinator from PoE would be cool. I think that would be an excellent system to include in Diablo 4, just using that. Or, you know, something else where we have control over greater affixes on our gear. Maybe we can add greater affixes on our gear. Something a bit more SSF friendly in general. And I would also really love to see maybe certain stats that can only appear on like high-end items, you know, maybe give us a reason to go into Torment 4 because there's like a new stats that can drop on items, for example. Or maybe something like a Val Orb style corruption system. So if we remove breaking of items from tempering, then I think it will be excellent to bring it back as kind of like the last step in the journey. After your item is done, you can Gamba with them. Gamba is always really fun, especially if you have like 10 copies of an item or something. So this is just, I think, something that would work extremely well in Diablo 4 and could really spice up the late game progression, give people something to do. Maybe some really cool stuff to look forward to try the luck to, you know, get those corruptions on their gear and so on. And that also wraps up this video here. So this is my combined feedback for Season 9. Overall, I do have to say it was relatively good, relatively fun. As I said, I played like 250 plus hours and I had a really good time all the way through. For now, I'm mostly done with the season. So I'm looking forward to, like, you know, new last Epoch season, new PoE League and so on. So this is what I'll be doing until Season 10 comes around, or to release the Season 10 PTR. So I'll be doing that and maybe a bit of variety as well. So lately I've been playing some Titan Quests, I've been doing some Hell Clock, had a really good time there. In any case, if you think that my feedback was awful or good, then let me know in the comments, or maybe if you have some thoughts of your own to add, then also put them there. I will check them out. I will also send Blizzard my document, and I probably will add a few things of, you know, whatever I read, for example, into that as well, if I agree with that. But yeah, for now, this is what I got here. So hope you enjoyed this. I wish you good luck with the remaining Season 9 if you're still playing. Otherwise, I guess stay tuned for more videos, especially when the PTR comes around. I'll be obviously covering that as much as I can. And besides that, a bunch of like other content like for the mentioned games coming out as well. So hope you enjoyed this. Hit the like and the subscribe button if you liked it. And I'll see you guys next time.